All right, hello, everybody. We're going to let people filter in and get started here in just a moment. All right, welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. So we are here tonight for a special event, Ethics and Leadership, a conversation with Traco Matthews. My name is Michael Burrows, and I serve as director of the Kegley Institute of Ethics. And on behalf of the Institute, thanks so much for joining us. And I want to begin by thanking our supporting sponsors who make this program possible: the Kegley family, Valley Strong Credit Union, Kaiser Permanente, and Adventist Health Bakersfield. I also want to thank our CSUB IT team that has helped us with the technology for tonight's event. Just a few words on the origin of this event and this event series. So we organize these conversations on ethics and leadership in the spirit of both learning from and celebrating impactful leaders in our community. We want to explore both the challenges within and the importance of ethical leadership as experienced in the real world. And learning directly from leaders who face challenges and still lead with an ethical vision in our community is, we feel, one of the best ways for us to do this. We're grateful that a leader both on our campus and in our community, Mr. Traco Matthews, has agreed to join us tonight and share his insight and experience with us. So just a few notes before I introduce our special guest, and just a few notes on procedure. I have a few preset questions for Traco, and following that, I will moderate a Q&A session with you, our audience. So for your questions, you can submit them anytime via the Q&A function in Zoom, which is at the tab is the bottom of your screen. And yeah, feel free to submit questions anytime something pops into your mind that you're curious about, and they'll be in the queue waiting for me when I transition to the Q&A period. And with that, I'm honored to introduce our guest. Traco Matthews is the Chief Program Officer at Community Action Partnership of Kern, or CAPK is the acronym. He brings extensive leadership skills and deep community connections to his work with Kern County's official anti-poverty agency. Traco continually seeks to improve culture, processes, and outcomes through his work in the community, and his greatest passion is encouraging and coaching others. In addition to coaching employees at work, he teaches business courses at both Bakersfield College and here at CSUB, provides mentoring for leaders on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and serves as a social pastor and community advocate. And with that, Traco, welcome once again, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. I am truly honored to be here.
So to begin, I was wondering, could you tell, for those of our audience members who don't know, can you tell us a bit more about the mission of CAPK and the important work your organization does in our community?
Absolutely. So I love talking about CAPK and the work that we do as a community action agency. So CAPK is one of the largest nonprofits in Kern County. We have over 900 employees. I think most recent estimates about 925 or 930, 16 programs. And we are part of a national network of community action agencies dedicated to the same purpose, which is really leading efforts to alleviate the conditions of poverty, give individuals and families support they need to thrive. And we do that in a variety of ways through early childhood education, like the Head Start program, food support. We know that food insecurity here in Kern County is big, homeless services, utility bill assistance, health nutritional support, tax preparation help through our VITA program, youth centers and family resource centers in different parts of Kern County, including East Kern, among many other programs. And we actually positively impact and touch the lives of over 100,000 individuals in Kern County annually. So it's an honor for us to get to serve this community, and an honor for me personally to do this work for CAPK.
Awesome. Thank you for providing that framing, Traco, and that important work. So the topic of our conversation tonight is broadly ethical leadership. And to start, who for you in your life, or maybe from afar or from a distance, has been particularly an influential exemplar for you of ethical leadership? And in what ways have they influenced you in your career?
That's a great question. And so I have so many people who have inspired me, who have influenced my career. And so I try to think through, some of the folks who have had the most influence. And I want to go kind of big and then distill it down.
Yeah, great.
Intentionally, and I'll share why. So most people who know me know that I'm a man of strong faith. And so, as a man of strong faith, I like to think that Jesus has had, a big impact on my life and my work and my mission and my purpose, personally, but also in the community. Great leaders, historical leaders like MLK Jr., Mandela, Gandhi, and so forth. But, people always talk about the men. And I want to talk about some of the female leaders who have also inspired me and had an impact on who I am today and the life that I have. Starting, of course, with my mom. So usually I talk about the influence that my dad had, but my mom has had a tremendous impact and influence on who I am as a person. And those values that she instilled in me continue to this day and influence the decisions that I make. There are some national leaders. I'm going to talk about them a couple of times tonight, I'm sure, but one I got to hear at the National CAP conference a couple of weeks ago in Boston. Her name is Heather McGee. And she's written a great book, take notes. It's called The Sum of Us. And it talks about how racism cost not just Black people in the US, but everybody. Very, very powerful speaker who brings data into a very compelling narrative about how a drain the pool, zero-sum mentality really negatively impacts everyone. Mm-hmm. Mirza Badararan, she's about the same age as me, but is very accomplished, has written another book called The Color of Money, has had a tremendous impact. It's something that I've been reading over the last few months. And then the final book that I wanted to talk about is actually from a young lady in the Central Valley, Valerie Kaur, who I think is actually connected and related to one of the family leaders here, Raji Brar, her cousin. But she has a book, See No Stranger, that I purchased a couple of months ago as well. And these books have just been phenomenal in terms of some of the theories and the values that I try to espouse as a leader. But then there are lots of folks locally who are not quite as well known or renowned. And I want to throw some names out and shout them out too. People like Robin Robinson from CityServe, Amanda Reese and Pavan Gill from the CAO, Nina Carter, City of Bakersfield, Pritika Ram, who I get to work with at CAPK, Mo Ali, The Next Steps, Emily Fisher at Era Energy, Reina Olaguez from Building Healthy Communities, Anna Lavin from the Bakersfield Kern Regional Homeless Collaborative, Raji Brar and Neetu Jaj, who technically they're from Countryside Marcus, but really they're everywhere in the community. And then of course, Norma Rojas Mora from Bakersfield College, and my sister, Natisha T. Johnson, Upside Productions Academy, and everywhere in the community that you go. And then of course, save the best for last out of my dozen local leaders who might not be as well known, Dr. Jessica Grimes, my amazing wife, who is the Dean at Taft College and the chairwoman for No Sister Left Behind. And the reason I call these folks inspirational, for me, the one thing that they all have in common is this: courage. Mm-hmm. To me, leadership is about courage to see beyond what the laws say today, what they should be, where we should be going as a society. That to me is truly the heart of ethics, mm-hmm. and it's the heart of leadership. Mm-hmm. Understanding what's the vision supposed to be like, how are we supposed to treat humans and each other, and how do we get there? Mm-hmm. And it takes courage to go on that journey.
Yeah, thanks for that, Traco. And I think that segues nice to kind of a point I was thinking about is, recently I was doing a workshop for the Kern Leaders Academy here in Bakersfield. And, there's young leaders from across Bakersfield who attend this, thinking about different aspects of leadership and how our city works, how they can get involved in different areas of growing and improving our city and our region. And we talked in part about kind of what it means to be a leader. And of course, there's the practical skill sets you need to have. There's having a vision, there's getting goals, setting goals completely and achieving those goals. But we also talk about the role of ethics and being an effective leader. And sometimes I think that gets maybe a little bit overlooked. And so I'm wondering, for you, what role does ethics play in being an effective leader in your career? How do you see that?
That's a great question. And for me, I think they're almost synonymous. I know that folks often like to think that you can be a good leader, an effective leader, and not necessarily think about ethics a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I used to teach a class of business and society, and it's all about ethics. But they really go so well together. They're almost interwoven. Here's what I mean. Leadership, often people like to distill leadership into getting results, all right, or having people follow you. And we'll talk about that. But it's one thing to get results. It's another thing to get results the right way. And you have to do both. One of the questions that I would ask my students all the time, I say, hey, give me a scenario that makes really great profit, a business model. And so they'd always come up with something IT related or whatnot. And I say, I got a better idea. And then they would say, I said, what if I told you that I had a business model where you didn't have to pay for any labor, zero labor cost? I said, and all my accountants in the room, raise your hands. I said, what are your most expensive costs, especially in the services industry? And they would say, labor. I said, well, what if you didn't have to pay for that? Well, we used to have a business model in the United States. It was called slavery, and it made money hand over fist, but it wasn't right. It wasn't ethical. And so is that actual leadership? It's not sustainable. So to me, if you want to have sustainable leadership, you have to have ethics as part of it. You have to get those results the right way. And for me, it's a matter of integrity first. Here's what I mean. I've worked in the corporate sector before. I worked in the public sector at KCSOS and now in the nonprofit sector at CAPK. And every place I've ever worked and every place I've ever visited has something on the wall, some sort of mission, value statement and whatnot. And almost in every single one of them, they talk about how much they value their people, their staff, their employees. Well, you've already said it. Now you've just got to live it out. You've got to do those values, live them out every single day. And it is incredibly difficult because often the monetary cost of living out those values is significant. So you have a choice, a tough choice that requires courage. You can choose to say, well, that's a value that's written on the wall, but we're going to make a choice that's in the best interest of our economic bottom line, or we're going to find a way to do both. We're going to maintain this value that we say is so important, that employees are our most valuable asset. Usually it's some version of that. And we're going to continue to treat them that way with how we spend our dollars and our time and invest in them and everything else. So to me, it's a matter of integrity. Well said,
Traco. Thank you. So we have, I'm sure, a number of students on the webinar tonight. And so I wanted to think about, advice you might have for young aspirational leaders on our campus and our community. Are there 2 to 3 areas of advice you might give to these students in terms of what they might think about in order to become and serve as effective and ethical leaders in an organization or in our community? Is there leadership advice that you kind of keep in mind for younger developing leaders?
Absolutely. So I think in the bio, you mentioned I've had the pleasure and the blessing to get to mentor quite a few community leaders. And I tell them all the same thing, just like I tell my leaders who report to me as well. Leadership is about behaviors more than the title. All right. And you can start operating in that role long before you have the title of leader. And so that's the first thing. Leadership starts today. There's not a magical moment where suddenly you wake up one day and, if you didn't have ethics yesterday, but you become a leader today, now you have ethics. Ethical leadership starts with a commitment to personal ethics. So start cultivating those values and being grounded in those personal ethics today. That's the first thing that I would share with any student or with someone who I'm mentoring. But then I always share some of my leadership pillars, and the first one is this. This is my non-negotiable, the value that I hope grounds me in my leadership style and the leadership that I want to demonstrate for life. And it's this: genuine care. I don't say love because it scares people. We'll go with genuine care. And, I think it's a Maxwell quote. He says, you're only a leader if people are following you. I like to expand on that by saying, well, people only follow those they trust. Mm-hmm. And people only trust those who genuinely care about them. And I usually take it a step further and say, and they only should trust those who genuinely care about them. I mean, if as a leader, I'm not taking you to greener pastures, I don't care about you flourishing and thriving as an employee and as a human being. Why are you following me? You shouldn't be following me. At this point, I mean, I'm messing with your family, with your money, with your career. So people should only follow those who care about them. Then I take it a step further with my leaders and I say, and if you're truly ethical, you should only want to lead people you genuinely care about. You should not want to be a leader for folks who, if you don't care about them becoming and growing into their best selves or accomplishing, positive results. So that intent is really, really important and critical to ethical success as a leader. And so I share that pillar. And then the next one that I share is usually this: humility. Life is about learning and growing, and it doesn't matter how competent, how capable, how educated you are. Trust me, there's always someone who knows a little bit more, has a different perspective. And, feedback is always a gift. It is always a gift. And so you've got to stay open to feedback. I have lots of stories and examples of individuals. I don't always share those. Personal examples, I will share those, but also organizations in every sector, government, nonprofit, private, where failure to have humility and to be open to feedback has been devastating. And so one of the things that I also share, this is kind of my second leadership pillar that I share with with all of my mentees, is feedback is a gift. All feedback is a gift. And people always laugh and say, oh yeah, I believe that. But when the rubber hits the road, it's really difficult to accept that. Right. I know, it's tough when you hear something, especially that you don't necessarily agree with. But even if there are strong dissenting voices or opinions that are provided in that feedback, guess what? It still tells you, it's still a gift because it tells you the truth about how someone is thinking or feeling, or how they perceive their interactions or your leadership style. It is a gift. And so if you can find a way to get past the defensiveness and be humble, the sky is the limit. You can continue to learn fast and go far.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's a good kind of point to make in, an era of polarization in which we live, right? I think sometimes we get very defensive when somebody disagrees with us, and that can be, we get our defenses up, but actually that can be a gift, right? We can
Yes, it is.
Show you a different perspective and even maybe show you how you need to frame what you're saying and the point you're trying to make in a more effective, accessible way. So I think you raise a very good point.
Thank you.
So Traco, sometimes when we talk about leadership, I think we also get caught up in, for understandable reasons, talking about great successes, right? And people we admire and things that have gone well as case studies. But I'm sure you obviously know, right, that leadership also involves challenges and significant setbacks at times. And I think we can learn a lot from those. So would you be willing to share maybe a challenge or a setback you faced in your career, and how did you meet that challenge and overcome it in your path?
Sure. No, well, thank you for asking the tough question right after I talk about feedback being a gift. So, there have been times in my career where I have not lived out, these two values that I just talked about. And there was a moment where I was really struggling. I remember with a leader in my life who I wasn't sure if they really cared about me. And I got to a place where I was like, I don't think I really care about them either. Mm-hmm. And I was to the point where I was thinking, I'm going to start to sabotage or potentially retaliate, take some steps to protect myself and break out the big guns. I got there in my heart. Luckily, I never let my behaviors get there because there could have been devastating consequences. Mm-hmm. My wife, who knows me incredibly well, she kind of talked me off the ledge and said, you sure this is who you want to become as a man of faith, as a social pastor, as a leader who mentors and talks about doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do and having that integrity. And so I recanted and said, you know what, I'm not going to go there. And what do you know, but the situation actually ended up getting better. And I ended up having opportunities to continue to soar because I chose not to respond in anger and impatience and retaliate. But you know, that's one lesson personally that I've learned, but I've learned other lessons as well, where I thought I was doing the right thing. And, you know, I still got pushback, and having to be persistent and to push through that, that's been one of the biggest challenges. And I'll give you an example. You know, you and I, we were lucky enough to work together on the BPD Community Collaborative for Police Reform. And I've been involved in a lot of community work, mostly related to equity, mostly related to how do we help rectify some of the historical wrongs for marginalized groups and people. And this was one example. And, you know, we got some pushback. And it's not the first time that I've gotten some pretty stiff pushback in my life for doing this equity work. In the workplace, I've gotten pretty good pushback. In the church, I've gotten pretty good pushback. In the community, people who think you're not doing enough or think you're doing too much. Often they will either malign your character or your name, or say that your intent isn't quite right. And it's easy to kind of get sucked into, frankly, the pettiness and lose sight of the goal, the mission. So the biggest challenge, I believe, for me has always been, how do I reground myself in the values that I have espoused from the beginning? If it was important a year ago when we started this work, those values haven't changed. The truth hasn't changed. So how do I find a way to recommit to the work that must be done? And it doesn't mean that you don't adjust what you're doing or the messaging or some of the things that that you communicate or what you do. But the underlying core values, if they're true then, they're true now and today. And so how do I stay grounded to those things and keep moving forward? My dad used to always say this, you know, integrity is, or character is doing the right thing at the right time, every time, not stopping, not allowing pushback or pettiness to stop the greatness that is within you. And so I try to live that out every single day, despite whatever challenges I may face, whether I'm at fault, whether I'm not. You get those challenges. And so for me, it's about persisting.
Yeah, I think that very, very well said, and really inspirational too. And I think that's something really important when we think about working with students and others in terms of thinking about leadership in our own lives, right? That identifying your values and what you're going to live by is so crucial. And then one of the, I guess, both fascinating and challenging aspects of leadership, right, is that it's not like once you have those set that there's just going to be a clear roadmap for every problem you face. I mean, you're always having to adapt about, okay, what does it look like to apply these values in this situation? And, you know, what is humility in this case? What is courage in this case? And really having to think those things through. So it's helpful to hear you talk about it tonight.
Thank you.
And I just want to pause and also invite people to, if you have questions for Traco, feel free to put them in the Q&A tab, and I'll be transitioning over to those shortly. So we'd love to hear your questions from the audience. Traco, as part of your values, you mentioned a focus on equity and working in the community. And so you are, in addition to your many other roles and your roles with CAPK, a consultant and a community advocate for greater attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion, in local organizations. And you just mentioned our work with Bakersfield Police Department, and you took a leading role on working for greater attention to diversity and equity and inclusion there as well. But, what are some core aspects of your approach to fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion? Like when you're consulting on projects like these, what are some core aspects you take to help advise people on how they can increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organizations? And I know some of that is probably not just a one size fits all, type strategy. So, please feel free to answer that as you see fit. And maybe also talk a bit about, why is that work so important for organizations to thrive, really? Why is diversity so important in that regard?
Those are all great questions. And while there is not one size that fits all, Michael, I believe everything starts with a premise. Mm-hmm. So, whether I'm talking to, someone who calls me and says, like they did last year after George Floyd happened, hey, my organization, we're kind of struggling with this and we got hit. What do we do? It always starts with the premise. And my premise for this work is frankly rooted and grounded in some of the foundational documents of Scripture and the Constitution, or I'd say the Declaration of Independence. So you're familiar with these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think if you were going to distill those words from the Declaration of Independence into a concept, it would be the concept of belonging. To me, what that says is that I have authority and a God-given and constitutional right to belong as a human being, as a person. All right. And so when you think about that concept of belonging, the language I like to use for anybody, and this is fairly universal, is we're family. We are one family, one community. And from there, anything is possible. Anything is feasible, viable. It makes sense. And outside of that context, not a lot of this makes sense. But within that framework, it makes sense. If the goal is greater belonging for every person in Kern County, you know what? All of this equity work makes sense. I don't have children, and I don't think you do either. But I can imagine if we had, a couple of sons. And, one day, I've used this analogy before. One day, I'll say you have two sons and you say, you know what, we're going to race around the family ranch for the inheritance. All right. You both belong, but you're going to run for the inheritance. And then the next day they wake up ready for the race and you discover that the younger son has a limp. His knee is messed up and he's wearing a brace. And you're like, oh, this doesn't look fair. And then it would be even crazier if you discovered that in the night, the older son had come in with a mallet and Tanya Harding, the younger son, hit him in the knee and crippled him. And then the race isn't fair. It's not equitable. Well, guess what? When it comes to equity, obviously I'm a Black man. And so I understand some of the history and what has impacted, Black people here in America. We're crippled in many regards. We have been, and not of our own doing. All right. Not of our own doing. And so if you think of both sons as family and you love both, well, then it matters. But if you don't care about the crippled son, well, so be it. Let's run the race. The inheritance is given to the older kid and fantastic. Everybody's happy. So I like to start with that premise and that framework because I think it impacts everything, whether it's, how government is done, whether it's how education is executed in our region, whether it's how services are delivered. Equity should be at the heart. And if it's not, there's probably something to be said about whether or not we really care about the folks who have that right to belong. When it comes to organizations and businesses, there's a lot of research. I don't have time to go into it because we're already at 6:30. But there is so much data that speaks to why it matters from a compliance perspective. Well, ethics and leadership are honestly about going beyond compliance. It's about understanding the values. And I have tons of values for why diversity is the right thing to do, why equity is the right thing to do, why inclusion is the right thing to do, and why belonging matters and is the right thing to do. But then even beyond the ethical component, there are also effectiveness reasons. And so I'll refer you back to the book, The Sum of Us. It talks about how historically in the 1930s, across the US, there were all of these pools that were built in thousands of cities around the nation. They were kind of like the big rec centers. And so everyone loved them. They were the pride of the different cities and areas. And when they were forced to be integrated, the Supreme Court passed a law, I think, after a kid drowned in Maryland. And so once they had to be integrated, rather than share the inheritance of these beautiful pools, they decided to drain them. So they drained the water out, planted trees and whatnot, and the impact was severe, not just to the Black people who didn't get to swim in those pools, but to the white families as well, and to everyone else who had, to that point, enjoyed that rich inheritance. Well, it's the same for businesses, all right? Often decisions are made that are not necessarily founded in an abundance mentality or an equity mindset. And as a result, frankly, everyone suffers.
Right. Thanks for, it's a very helpful framing. Thank you, Traco. So Traco, I want to transition to some audience questions here. We do have a number in the queue, and again, everybody feel free to contribute questions as they come up here for you. Our first question, and this is actually one I'm glad we're starting with this, because you often refer to yourself in part as a social pastor. And the first question is, what is a social pastor?
It's a great question. So I'll be honest, it's actually a moniker that I think my wife gave to me. And so I kind of just tossed out one day. It was her idea. And I said, oh, I like that. Yeah. I'm taking it. And so that was probably 3 or 4 years ago. But I've always been involved in ministry. Like I said, I'm a man of strong faith. And so I've been involved in church ministry. And, a few years ago, after kind of an existential crisis where I was grounding myself in these values that we've been talking about and my purpose, my life purpose, I realized, so often God opens doors for me in the community as much, or sometimes even more so than just in the 4 walls of the church. And I felt this angst about just going full-fledged and doing that work wholeheartedly because I thought, but, I'm supposed to do this here. Can I do this here too? And anyway, once I got the moniker, I thought, you know what? No, if the heart of my faith is love, can I show love in the community or genuine care in the community, just like I do within the 4 walls of the church? Absolutely. So really, it's just a title that I kind of gave to myself because that purpose of being an encourager and a coach, showing that genuine care, leading in that way in the community, advocating because of it, it's just a title that I think encapsulates that work more effectively than some of the other names that I have heard.
Great, fantastic.
Thanks.
Traco, we have a question here from Fatima, and Fatima asks, what strategies do you use to not lose focus? Like when you get mad or you're feeling frustrated or angry, what strategies do you use to keep calm when you're under pressures?
Oh my God, that is a great question. Yeah. And I'll tell you, Fatima, it is not easy. So there have been times where I'm sitting in a meeting and I remember one example where, I raised my voice. I thought it was good advocacy because someone actually challenged who I was. We're sitting talking about some equity measures or what I saw as equity measures related to the census, and someone said, "Who are you?" And I could feel in my heart, literally, and I didn't have this much hair at the time, but the hairs kind of on my head and the back of my neck were standing up. And so I stood up and, I had to pause for just a moment because I remember thinking, okay, this is not who I am. I can't cuss this person out because that trust, that brand of who I am as someone who genuinely cares about everyone, even people who dissent vehemently. I can't yell at this person and say crazy things and then come back and say that this is who I am as a person. Who I am is who I am all the time. So even in the moment, I stood up and I think that kind of helped me, but it allowed me just to take a moment to pause and then to respond in a way that was, like I said, my voice was louder than it normally is. And I think it was strong in terms of advocacy, but it was polite and respectful. And there have been often, many times where I've gotten threats or, someone has said something that I did not agree with. I've gotten feedback I didn't agree with. And usually what I try to do is pause. If it's in the moment, I'll count to three. If it's something that's written in the paper, I'll go home. Often I'll vent to my wife and say, I can't believe this. Or she'll ask me, why are you looking so, sad or devastated? Where's that smile? And I'll say, oh, somebody said this or this happened. And I'll talk it through. And at the end of the day, often I'll pray and refocus on, okay, what's the goal here? What's the aspiration? Does this feedback, even if it's wrong, does it matter? Do I need to, take it? And if there's not a lot of value, thank you. I appreciate your feelings. I hear what you're thinking. You disagree with this perspective. I'll take that and keep moving forward with what I know is right. And so for me, it's about pausing, but then getting back to being, again, grounded in those truths and the values that I know are enduring.
So Traco, even another question from just an anonymous attendee, and they ask, you spoke about the importance of inclusion and belonging. Can you give us an example of how you intentionally include others?
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a great question. So, this is something I talk about it as kind of a leadership, an ethical philosophy, but it's more almost of like a life cause and purpose for me. This is work that I would do long after I'm in a formal leadership role or position, because it's, again, just core to my faith. I believe that every human being has a God-given right to belong, to be included, to, share in the inheritance of this world. And because of that, I believe that I have an ethical mandate to live that out in everything that I do. So I haven't always done it incredibly well, but when I learn how to do it better, I try to adjust. And so one example that I will share with folks, just full disclosure, I went through some leadership training probably 11 years ago when I was back with State Farm. And I'm sitting there with a lot of VPs and leaders, and it's mostly men in the room. And the PhD, who's doing the training, and she's talking about some of these issues and topics. And she doesn't call it male privilege, but she speaks to some of the research on how men tend to, vocalize their opinions and their thoughts a lot more than women in corporate settings. And I happened to be in the room with a woman who was levels higher than me, who I respected highly. And it hit me hard because my wife had been talking about it for years, since we had been probably dating. And she's getting she had her master's in religious studies and divinity and all that. So she knew all this stuff, and she'd been telling me, but I didn't believe it. And so I'm listening, and it kind of hurt me. I was like, I don't know if I agree with that or not. And at this was day one. The end of the week, I remember thinking, they were asking, we're kind of doing a recap, and I was like, this lady is way smarter than me, and most of the people in the room, and her voice is not as loud. Mm-hmm. She's more tentative. And I was like, she was right. Mm-hmm. Women don't feel quite as included. They don't feel that same sense of inheritance in corporate settings, at least per the data. Mm-hmm. So I made a commitment to myself in that moment. I said, you know what? For one, I'm going to go home and apologize to my wife and confess I do have male privilege. I thought I couldn't have male privilege because I was a Black guy. And I was like, I don't have privileges, but I realized I do. And I could do something with those privileges. I could include others. I could share those privileges with the women at the table or in the room who might feel a little more reticent or maybe not want to share their voices quite as readily. And so I made an intentional decision in that moment to say, every opportunity I get, if I see someone who's tentative, but I know they have something to say, I'm gonna call them out by name and just, I'll speak to the facilitator or whoever and say, I've had a conversation with so-and-so. I think they have something really insightful to share on this topic.
Yeah.
And that's one example of what I've tried to do for the last decade. And it's been effective in terms of getting people's voices at the table that need to be heard, and they need to be included at a higher level.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think it also is, I think sometimes we have this idea of leaders as being the people who are going to speak and lead and be vocal and out there. And of course, there's a time for that, but actually you're pointing out quite nicely that sometimes it's about being a facilitator. It's about actually hanging back some, right? It's about not always being the first one to speak. You got to be kind of aware of what that might do for other people's opportunities to speak and how they might feel about speaking up in a meeting environment or a leadership environment. So I'm glad you raised that point.
Thank you.
Traco, so Dr. Martinez writes, thank you, Mr. Matthews, for being with us tonight. Some of my students are with us. In our class discussion on leadership, I include this quote by John Gardner. And he's asking if you wouldn't mind just giving some comments on it or what strikes you. And
sure.
The quote is, the first and last task of a leader is to keep hope alive. I hope that we can finally find our way through to a better world, despite the day's bitter discouragement, despite the perplexities of social action, despite our own shallowness and wavering resolve. Spark any thoughts or reflections for you?
No, I absolutely love that. One of my, I guess, strengths, with the Strengths Finders is being inspirational, but inspiration is huge to me. On the DISC profile, I'm an eye off the charts. And so I'm a big believer that hope and inspiration and joy often win the day when nothing else can. My mind goes back to those words. I can't remember if it was JFK or Robert Kennedy, but one of them who said, some men see things as they are and wonder why. Others see things as they could be and wonder why not. Mm-hmm. Well, to me, that latter statement is the vision and the mission and the call to all great leaders. I believe that, like I said earlier, great leaders, they all look at what's current state. And then they say, this is maybe good enough, but how can it be better? Mm-hmm. Where are we stretching and progressing in all of these spaces, whether it's in our places of work or in society or in our churches or in our community or in government? Where are we getting better? And the only thing that is going to help us get there is, for one, envisioning where we need to go, understanding those values, those ethics that undergird the direction that we think we need to go in, but then also being able to communicate and inspire others to follow. You are truly only a leader if people follow you. And so I believe that inspiration and hope play a huge role in getting folks to believe, again, despite the history, despite the barriers in front of them, to say, you know what, we can fix it this time. This time we're going to take another stab at it and we're going to be victorious because we've got a different perspective. Mm-hmm. We understand at a higher level, we're unified, we're one family, we're one team. With that, anything is possible. Mm-hmm. Let's go. And so I absolutely agree with that statement, just in terms of the core and the heart, that inspiration, hope often bring the victory. It's great.
Traco, we have a question from Fred, and Fred's asking, have you ever had a work situation where you were faced with possibly compromising your ethical values? And if so, how did you address that situation?
Yes, I have had multiple scenarios where I have had temptations to compromise my values, my ethics, and do the wrong thing because, maybe nobody would see it, or they wouldn't know until way later and it wouldn't matter quite as much. And I'll be honest, I'm not going to say that there have not been times where I didn't fail and I did not live out, my deeply held values and ethics. As a Christian, I believe in grace and forgiveness. And there have been many times where I have had to ask for it and receive it. But I will say that for the big areas in my life where I have known, okay, this is a challenge. These values are clashing. These priorities are clashing. And I know as a leader who wants to, live this vision of everyone has a right to belong. Everyone should be able to share in the inheritance. We want to have a culture of trust, etc. I know what the decision is. But I also know sometimes that not everyone agrees with that decision, and I know what the implications might be. Mm-hmm. So, when I was speaking earlier about some of the challenges with doing this equity work, I know that sometimes folks may see me differently than they see others who aren't doing this type of equity work and say, you know what, this other person's a little bit safer. Let's choose them for this leadership opportunity. So when it comes to ethical decisions, that's probably been one of the biggest challenges that I have often had to wrestle with personally is, if I do this work, does it mean that I leave some opportunities on the table? Mm-hmm. And maybe I don't make quite as much money, or I don't get the promotion quite as quickly, because people see me as less safe. Mm-hmm. Well, I have often had to think through that, go back home and think about all of my heroes and say, well, this is a time for courage, leadership, and following through on your values and your ethics. At the end of the day, it's about courage. Are you willing to do the right thing in spite of the fears that grip your heart?
So Traco, we have a few more questions in the queue here. And actually one kind of just practical question I wanted to get to as well, Laura asks here. She's asking, you mentioned a few books at the start of our conversation tonight.
Yes.
Could you, if you can remember which ones you were talking about there, could you reference those again for our audience?
I sure can. So the first one that I mentioned was by Heather McGee. I think it just came out this year, maybe late 2020, and it's called The Sum of Us. The Sum of Us. And actually, I just got this book 2 weeks ago, and so I think I'm to chapter 3. But it's very powerful, very compelling. And it talks about the zero-sum mindset that ends up being devastating for teams and organizations and communities and the nation. And so, I think it's an amazing book. I definitely recommend that you pick that one up. Another one is an equity book that talks about kind of the history of Blacks and their experience and interactions with money, called The Color of Money. And the spelling on the last name, don't quote me, but the name is Mersa Baradaran. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And so she has done some incredible research and work. I think she is a professor at UCLA. Again, same age, way more accomplished, but she's just phenomenal in terms of the data that she brings to bear. And it really paints a really powerful picture of some of the disparities that happened, yes, years and years ago, generations ago, in the early, right after the Civil War and the period of Reconstruction and thereafter in Jim Crow, but also how some of those patterns and trends actually impact Black people today, why we're still crippled. Mm-hmm. And so it's a great book on equity. And then the other book, and I'm through just a few chapters on this one as well. I got it maybe a month ago. It's called See No Stranger. See No Stranger. And this one is from I'll say a regional author, Valerie Kaur. That's Kaur. And she's out of Fresno, where I was born. And I saw her give a speech some years ago where she talked about darkness and hope. And she said, maybe this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb. Maybe it's the darkness of the womb. And we're ready to be born into a new day of hope and beautiful change for our communities and for our nation. I never forgot that. And so when she came out with this book, I was like, I have to buy it, because this is everything I believe when it comes to belonging and the inheritance that is truly a human right, for people. And so those are the 3 books that I mentioned. I also do share a couple of other books. They're almost like my leadership Bibles. This one right here is always on my desk, The Speed of Trust. Read this one, taught it, used it quite a bit when I was at KCSOS as the one of the HR directors there for leadership development. I share that with all of my mentees. This is another great book that talks about culture, starts with why. It's a great book for understanding how to effectively navigate and lead changes as a leader, And then another book that is also just phenomenal in terms of equity is from, I think it's Richard Rothstein, The Color of Law, and it talks about redlining and some of the housing inequities and disparities that Black people have faced over the generations. And so kind of similar to The Color of Money, phenomenal books. And I have more, but I'll leave it with those 6.
Great, thank you, Traco. It's definitely some good literature for us to follow up on. I appreciate that. And so a few more questions kind of coming in here. So first of all, I just want to mention from Dr. Thomas Wallace, just says thank you for contributing to fostering a better Bakersfield. So I wanted to put that comment out there. Thanks, Dr. Wallace, for being with us tonight. We also have a question from Sarah Hendrick, from one of our friends from CSUB. It says, Traco, thanks for your honesty tonight and being an inspirational member of our CSUB alumni family. How can mentors and mentees meaningfully discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion when they're from different backgrounds, cultures, and often different generations?
That is a great question. And I have seen some DEI conversations go really awry without the proper context and facilitation and guidance. So I'm not one of the folks who says, hey, just run out there and start talking about this with everybody and asking, do it in my opinion, a somewhat protected environment. And here's what I mean by this. So I've had conversations, with a number of folks about 2 different relationships. If I'm talking to my brothers, we're 5 boys and then 2 younger sisters, we say all kinds of crazy stuff to each other. I mean, they say crazy things to me. And so because we have a high trust relationship. So they can say things and not get in trouble, and I'm not going to be upset. The feedback there is almost always truly a gift, and it's easy to receive it. But if I run into someone in the street and they say something that is caustic or just mean and cruel or pejorative, I'm less likely to respond as effectively or joyfully to that comment or statement. So here's the lesson. I believe that you kind of test the waters as you build the relationship. The more trust you have, probably the more you can talk about some of these high stakes issues, and it'll be productive. It'll be fruitful. Same in a facilitated environment. That's what the facilitator is supposed to do, is to help create a safe environment, a space where you can feel that level of trust and have these types of high stakes conversations without folks, feeling attacked or feeling, we're never going to get anywhere here, where dissenting opinions, different perspectives are not just tolerated, but valued and embraced. That's when you're going to have open, honest dialogue and conversation. So it's not easy, but it is doable. And so I think you want to have a plan and a strategy. I know that CSUB does amazing work in this space and has amazing aspirations in terms of how you want to continue to progress these types of conversations. And so I think part of it is developing an intentional plan and strategy to create environments where these types of conversations can happen.
Thank you, Traco. Traco, just want to share a lot of great questions in the queue. It's really wonderful ones. And I want to share just a comment from CSUB President, Dr. Lynette Zelezny. President Zelezny notes a brilliant presentation on ethics and leadership. Traco, you define ethical leadership, and so proud that you teach our new generation of leaders at CSUB and serve on numerous CSUB university advisory boards as well. Thank you so much for being with us. And that's a message from President Lynette Zelezny. Thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Zelezny. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Those words mean a lot to me.
So, Traco, just a couple more questions coming in here. So one comes from Dr. Wallace. What advice would you give to young men and women who feel that they don't have the skills to be leaders?
Well, that's a great question. And, I actually like to start from this position, because I've heard that, Dr. Wallace, more than you think. A lot of folks are, I don't have the talent, the skills. and sadly, crazy enough, usually female students and women in the workplace who I have either tried to encourage or tap on the shoulder and say, you would be an amazing leader. I see greatness. Other people see greatness in you. I want to advocate. And they're like, no, I don't have the talent or the skills. Well, back to one of my leadership Bible books, Speed of Trust, it talks about how trust and credibility is really built on a couple of major pillars, character and competence. And I haven't gone too deep into that, but I can. And so I say it this way, usually on a job description, on the posting, all you're going to see often is the competence side of it. Mm-hmm. It's the skills needed for the position. Here's what the job duties are. Do you have the experience? Have you done this before, et cetera? What no one ever lists, because it's not technically from an HR perspective, an essential function of the job, is the character aspect, the integrity, the intent. And so often people have that character. And I tell folks this, if you have character, that character travels. So you're already almost 50% of the way there. And being a leader and having people report to me, trust me, I know in terms of getting results and getting the job done, I want that character just as much as I need that competence. And so character travels. So I tell every person who tells me I'm not a leader, I say, no. Are you a person of character? Do you have values? Have you identified those values? Do you try to live those values out every single day or in the workplace? More often than not, the answer is yes. Most people, they don't come to me with that question if they're not living their values or trying to move in a positive direction, a healthy direction. So I say, well, that character travels. You're 50% of the way there, which is probably more than what you thought. So now let's talk about the competencies and the skills and the capabilities you might need to develop. What results have you gotten that you might need to add to your resume or to your LinkedIn profile or whatever? And then you've got a real strong platform from which to run. So that's usually the advice that I give to folks who say, I'm not a leader. I say, I'm gonna challenge that. Mm-hmm. Let's see.
Mm-hmm. Traco, this question comes from Dr. Nate Olson. And he says, first of all, so wonderful to hear your thoughts on leadership, Traco. You've done so much important leadership work in our community. I'm wondering if you could say more about how you decide how to focus your energy. And I think it's a great point. How do you decide what leadership opportunities to take, given there are many opportunities and you are a valued leader in our community? So how do you make those distinctions in your work?
Thank you. That's a great question. Again, full disclosure, I have not always done that well. And depending on the day, sometimes I still feel like I don't do that always incredibly well. Mm-hmm. Again, on the DISC profile, I'm an eye off the charts. I love all of the good ideas. And so some folks come to me and they say, oh my God, we got to change this. We need to change education. We need to change economic attainment for people in the community. We need to fix, public safety. We need to fix government. There are so many challenges and issues that probably do need to be addressed, and I can't be involved in all of them. So I've tried to do a better job over the last 3 or 4 years of managing my yeses, saying no more often, and aligning the work that I do with my deeply held values. So here's something that I started doing about 5 years ago. And this is my strategy for managing what I get involved in. I actually, kind of use an acronym. I decided after I kind of was thinking through, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to be accomplishing? Okay, I'm going to be a social pastor. That's kind of my life call. What does that look like? And I thought, I want to be healthy personally in these 5 spaces and help progress things in society in these 5 spaces as well. And I don't have time to go into all of them, but spiritual health, I'm already involved in a faith community. And so I was like, I'm going to do good work. I want to do good work there to the extent that I can. Emotional health. All right. Heart health. How do I help support growth and health in that space? Intellectual health. This was one of the things that I say, yeah, I want to teach. I always want to share knowledge and help students and people learn and grow. And I want to be part of that continual learning and growing journey and process. Financial health, all right, that inheritance piece that we spoke about. So economic impact, and then physical health. So it even got to the point, it was so granular where I say, you know what, I'm going to look for careers in these 5 spaces because I want to spend, my 40 hours a week, or as a leader, 50 or 60 hours a week or whatever in those spaces, and commit time to one of those 5 life aspirations. But then, with the community, again, I get tapped on the shoulder a lot. And I want to see change and progress in a lot of different spaces as well. And so if they align with one of those areas, I might say yes, I might not say yes. And what I've tried to do for the last couple of years is, at least with boards and teaching and the different things that I do, is if I say yes, I'm already thinking, what am I going to say no to? What's going to drop off my plate? And so that way, I have energy enough to stay emotionally strong and have that joy.
Yeah, a great question and helpful response. And I think that really is a challenge for a lot of people in leadership positions. Especially if you have a desire to serve, it's easy to take on many commitments, but if you're stretching yourself too thin and you're exhausted, it's going to be hard to do any one of those commitments very well too. So there is kind of that tension there. So thanks for that framing, Traco. That's useful. And I'm going to take your advice some too.
Oh, thanks.
So Traco, we're going to go a little over time, but
all right.
You're from your office, I'm from my home. Nobody's going to make us leave. So I think there's 2 questions left in the queue. I'm going to ask, they're different kinds of questions. I'm just going to ask both.
Okay.
You can respond as you see fit. So the first one's from Brianna and the second one's from Becky. And Brianna asks, what advice do you have for young leaders working in organizations where they're leading those who have been in the organization longer than they have? Which is a very interesting question. And then Becky's question is, how do you show your faith and your love of Jesus and Christianity in a secular workplace?
Well, those are great questions. Okay, I'll take the first one first, and then I'll come back to the second one. So that's a great question. So I'm 43 years old, just turned 43 in August. I'm not the spring chicken. I'm not the youngest person in the room anymore, usually where I work. I'm also usually not the oldest person in the room where I work. I'm kind of in that middle range, but I've been blessed and lucky to kind of lead a lot of folks who are younger than me, but also folks who've been around a lot longer, have more expertise, stronger capabilities in their discipline, et cetera. So I understand this. And here's where I have found a sense of groundedness and peace in terms of leadership. If you're leading ethically and you're grounded in the values and the principles that you believe are right, usually those values and those principles, they have endured for thousands of years. They go beyond, any leader that is on the scene today. When I talk about courage, way back in the time of Christ, and before that, I have examples of leaders who led ethically and had courage. You talk about philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, who lived out his ethics and values to the point where, it's like they're willing to die for this stuff. Mm-hmm. So conviction and groundedness in principles, that's a concept that is eternal. And so I know that if I'm aligned with principles that endure, then, I'm okay. I'm standing on solid ground, and my leadership, if it is full of integrity, and I'm actually doing the things that I say I'm doing, and I'm actually living out those truths and those values that endure forever, well, guess what? That's unshakable. Mm-hmm. Nobody can say, no one's ever going to come to me, at least publicly, and say, I think love is the wrong approach, Traco. That genuine care that you talk about, I don't agree with that. Well, they can, but I'm going to listen to that feedback and I'll know where you stand. And then I'm going to go and just say, that's okay. I'm going to double back down on this enduring principle that has lasted for generations and been successful and effective for forever. So if you're standing and your leadership is grounded on principles that endure, you have nothing to worry about in terms of how you lead people. It does not mean that you will not face consequences. So I want that message to be loud and clear. All right. Often in places of work, just depending on what the culture is like, you may run into folks who don't agree with you. And if you report to them and they don't agree with the principles that you are trying to live out, or sometimes they may not even be living the principles or the values on their own wall. Well, guess what? There can be some collateral damage. You have to kind of look yourself in the eye, in the mirror, and say, is this a place where I want to work? Is this a place where I want to be and invest my time and my energy somewhere where maybe the culture is not grounded on those same enduring principles? But you're standing on solid ground there. And then the last question, which was, how do I live out my faith in a secular world? Well, the heart of my faith as a Christian is, you can sum it up literally in one word: it's love. All right. There are two principles, and I'm not going to preach, but there are two principles: love God, love people. But love is the heart of my faith. And so, kind of like I talked about when I said, hey, I want to do work in the church, in the four walls, and in the ministry. Well, the heart of that work is going to be love. But I also want to do it outside of the four walls of the church, in society and in the community and whatnot. And to be honest, like I said, I don't always go around telling folks, hey, I love you and I'm committed to it. And whether you hate me or not, I'm still going to stand strong in that love and that genuine care for you. I might call it something else because that word sometimes scares folks, but that's where my heart is, and that's who I want to be. I've literally gotten, just as an example, I've gotten death threats for some of the equity work that we've done in the community. And I know that people don't like it. I know that people push back. They think maybe it's a farce or it's a hoax. And no one should really do equity work or talk about diversity or really push for that. But guess what? At the end of the day, I wouldn't mind leading those folks. And if I want to lead them, I gotta love them. I think Dr. Cornel West said it succinctly. He said, if you don't love the people, you can't lead the people. If you don't serve the people, you can't lead them. So my commitment, my conviction is that if I say in church that love is the heart of my faith and I'm gonna live it out there, I sure as heck better live it in the secular world, or it's really not meaningful. That's the integrity and the standard that I want to hold myself to. And I think that love travels.
Thank you, Traco. I think it's a good note to end on as well. And everybody, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Traco, thank you again for your comments, sharing some of your knowledge and wisdom with us as well. And hope to see everybody at a future KIE event. I put our website in the chat, so please check us out there. And stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll be talking to y'all soon.
Thank you.